The morning after Claire's funeral arrived too quickly, as if time had lost all respect for Daniel Harris, and he woke before dawn in the small Oregon house they had shared for 22 years, the silence pressing on him like weight he could not push away, the kind of quiet that follows when a voice that once filled every corner suddenly disappears, and as he sat on the edge of the bed, he reached out without thinking to the other side, his hand meeting cold sheets instead of warmth, and that single moment told him everything had truly changed, because grief was no longer something happening around him but something living inside him, moving with him, breathing with him, following him into the kitchen where he poured coffee he did not want and watched steam rise while memories crowded his mind faster than he could slow them down, Claire laughing at his bad jokes, Claire reminding him where he left his keys, Claire standing in the doorway every evening asking how his day had been. And now the doorway was empty, the question unasked, and Daniel felt like a man who had survived a storm only to find the world afterward unfamiliar and broken, so he tried to keep moving, telling himself that motion was better than stillness, that if he cleaned the house or organized the garage or answered emails, the ache might soften, but it didn't, because every object carried her touch, every room echoed with her presence, and when he opened the closet to put away laundry, he froze. Surrounded by her clothes hanging neatly as she had left them, colors she loved, scarves she wore in winter, sweaters she stole back from him with a smile, and his chest tightened so hard he had to lean against the doorframe to breathe, realizing he had spent weeks avoiding the space without knowing it, because facing her absence here felt too real, too final, and as his fingers brushed a soft blue sweater, the one she wore on quiet Sundays, he pulled it free and held it close, breathing in deeply, catching a faint trace of lavender soap and something else that was only Claire, and for a brief second the world steadied, his heart slowing, his shoulders loosening, as if her warmth had reached across time to hold him together, and the relief scared him because it reminded him how much he needed her, how much of himself was missing without her, and he sank onto the floor, sweater clutched to his chest, not sobbing loudly but letting tears fall in heavy silence, the kind of crying that feels private and endless. And as the sun climbed higher, light spilled through the window, illuminating dust in the air and casting soft shadows on the walls, and Daniel realized he had not noticed the beauty of morning since she passed, because grief had narrowed his world to pain alone, yet here it was, the same sun they once watched together with coffee mugs in hand, and the thought brought both comfort and hurt, pushing him to his feet because staying on the floor felt like giving up. And he wasn't ready for that, not yet, so he moved through the day with quiet determination, showering, dressing, stepping outside into the cool air where neighbors nodded kindly but avoided long conversations, unsure of what to say, and Daniel appreciated that more than they knew, because words often felt wrong now, too small for the weight he carried, and as he drove aimlessly through familiar streets, past places they had shared dinners and laughter, he felt a strange pull between wanting to remember and wanting to escape, because memory hurt but forgetting felt like betrayal, and somewhere between those feelings he found himself parked near a walking trail they used to visit on weekends, the trees tall and steady, the path stretching ahead, and without thinking too much, he stepped out of the car and began to walk, each step firm and fast, his breath deep, his thoughts racing, because movement felt like the only thing keeping him from breaking apart, and as he walked, memories came not as sharp pain but as quick flashes, Claire teasing him about his slow pace, Claire pointing out birds he never noticed, Claire reaching for his hand when the path grew uneven, and instinctively his fingers curled as if hers were still there, and again that warmth returned, subtle but real, not a vision or illusion, but a feeling rooted deep in his chest, reminding him that love did not vanish when a person died, it changed shape, it lingered, it lived on inside the one left behind. And that realization unsettled him because it meant grief was not something to escape but something to carry. Something to learn how to live with, and by the time he returned home, the house felt different, not lighter, but less hostile, as if acknowledging his pain had softened its edges, and that night, when he sat alone on the couch where they once watched movies wrapped in blankets, he didn't turn on the television to drown out his thoughts, instead he sat quietly, holding the blue sweater in his lap, letting memories rise and fall without fighting them, and in that stillness, Daniel understood that the warmth he felt was not a sign of moving on or forgetting Claire, but proof that what they shared had shaped him too deeply to disappear, and though the road ahead frightened him, though the nights would remain long and heavy, He sensed for the first time since her passing that life had not ended with her last breath, it had simply changed its rhythm, slower and sadder, but still moving forward, and that fragile awareness, born from pain and memory, became the first step in Daniel's long journey back toward feeling alive again. Daniel did not plan to change his routine, but grief slowly pushed him out of his house because the walls felt too close and the memories too loud, and one afternoon he found himself standing inside the local community library in a small Oregon town, a quiet place filled with soft footsteps and the smell of old paper, and he signed up to volunteer without much thought, believing silence among books would be easier than silence at home, and at first he worked alone, sorting returns, stacking shelves, keeping his head down, until one evening a calm voice thanked him for staying late, and when he looked up he saw Emily Parker, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and a gentle smile that did not try to fix him or question him, and that simple presence caught him off guard, because she did not look at him with sympathy or curiosity, just quiet respect, and they exchanged short words at first, names, schedules, nothing personal, yet Daniel noticed how easy it felt to be near her, how his chest did not tighten the way it usually did around people, and over the next few weeks their paths crossed often, always natural, always unforced, brief conversations growing slightly longer, about favorite authors, about how the town felt slower in winter, about how the library seemed to hold stories people never returned, and Daniel liked that Emily spoke calmly, never filling silence just to avoid it, because silence was something he knew well. And one evening, while organizing a donation box, Emily casually mentioned she understood grief because she had lost her husband years earlier, and she said it simply, without drama, without asking him to respond, and Daniel felt something inside him unlock, not pain but recognition, because for the first time since Claire's passing, he felt seen without having to explain himself, and after that day their conversations changed, not deeper in a heavy way but more honest, and Daniel found himself looking forward to volunteering, choosing clean shirts again, caring slightly about how he appeared, which confused and unsettled him, because he believed those parts of him had died with Claire, and yet there they were, quietly waking, and one afternoon Emily invited him to help with a small reading event, and as they worked side by side setting up chairs, their hands brushed briefly, and the contact was innocent but powerful, sending a reminder through Daniel's body that he was still human, still capable of feeling, and guilt followed immediately, sharp and sudden, forcing him to pull away and focus on the task, but Emily noticed nothing, or chose not to, continuing as if nothing had changed, and that kindness meant more than she knew, because Daniel was fighting a war inside himself, torn between loyalty to memory and the unexpected pull of connection, and later that evening, as they walked out together, the sky turning orange above quiet streets, Emily spoke softly about how loss reshapes time, how some days feel endless while others disappear, and Daniel surprised himself by responding, sharing small pieces of his life with Claire, not details but emotions, the warmth, the partnership, the silence they once shared comfortably, and Emily listened without interrupting, without comparing, and when he finished, she simply said that love does not expire when a person is gone, it only changes where it lives. And those words stayed with him long after they parted, echoing in his thoughts during sleepless nights, and soon their walks after library hours became routine. Short at first, then longer, through quiet neighborhoods and tree-lined paths, always respectful, always safe, and Daniel felt his body relax during these walks, his breath deeper, his thoughts slower, as if Emily's presence grounded him in the present instead of pulling him back into the past, and one evening, while sitting on a bench near a small park, Emily mentioned how she once believed she would never feel whole again after her loss, and Daniel felt the weight of her honesty, realizing she was not offering hope as an idea but as something lived, and that frightened him, because hope felt dangerous, like something that could be taken away again, and yet he could not deny how alive he felt in these moments, not happy, not healed, but awake, and as days turned into weeks, Daniel noticed subtle changes, the way he laughed more easily, the way his shoulders no longer stayed tense all day, the way the house felt less hostile when he returned at night, and still, guilt followed closely, whispering that he was betraying Claire simply by smiling again, and one rainy afternoon, when Emily invited him to stay inside the library after closing to finish paperwork, the quiet felt heavier, more intimate, and Daniel almost pulled away from the situation entirely, ready to make an excuse and leave, but Emily spoke first, saying she valued his presence not because she expected anything but because it was easy to be honest around him, and that honesty disarmed him, because it asked for nothing, demanded nothing, and in that moment Daniel realized this connection was not about replacing Claire or escaping pain, it was about remembering he was still alive, still capable of warmth, still worthy of companionship, and when they finally left the building, rain falling softly around them, they stood under the awning laughing quietly at their bad timing, and Emily lightly touched his arm to steady herself, and the warmth of that simple contact spread through him, not burning, not rushing, just steady and real, and Daniel felt something shift inside, a quiet acceptance that grief and connection could exist together, that loving again did not mean losing what came before, and as he drove home that night, rain tapping against the windshield, he realized part of him was afraid not because he was falling for Emily, but because he was starting to believe that life could still hold meaning after loss, and that belief, as fragile as it was, marked the beginning of a new chapter he had never expected to open. Daniel tried to tell himself that what he felt was only friendship, that the steady pull toward Emily was nothing more than comfort shared by two people who understood loss, yet as days moved quickly and routines blended together, he could no longer ignore how deeply she had entered his thoughts, how her voice stayed with him long after their walks ended, how he caught himself smiling alone at memories of quiet jokes and shared silence, and this awareness stirred a mix of fear and longing that kept his heart restless, because every step toward Emily felt like a step away from Claire, even though he knew that was not true, and to steady himself he leaned harder into routine, volunteering more, filling his calendar, moving through life at a faster pace so his thoughts would not linger too long in one place, but the heart does not follow schedules. And one evening, as Daniel and Emily walked through a trail near the river, the air cool and sharp, Emily spoke about how grief does not fade but changes shape, how it becomes part of the body like an old scar. And Daniel felt the truth of her words settle deep inside him, because he carried Claire everywhere, in habits, in memories, in the way he still reached for his phone to text her, and suddenly he stopped walking, overwhelmed by a rush of emotion he had been holding back. And Emily did not rush him or ask questions, she simply stood beside him, close enough to offer support without pressure. And in that still moment Daniel realized how rare it was to be understood without explanation, and later that night, alone at home, he stood in the living room holding a framed photo of Claire, her smile frozen in time, and he spoke aloud for the first time since her passing, admitting his confusion, his guilt, his fear of feeling alive again, and though the room stayed silent, he felt no anger, only a quiet release, as if speaking the truth allowed the weight on his chest to ease slightly, and from that night forward Daniel stopped running from his emotions and instead let them move through him. Quickly, fully, without resistance, and this shift changed how he moved around Emily, because he stopped pretending he felt nothing and instead focused on honesty with himself, even when it hurt, and one afternoon, while helping Emily plan a community event, they shared laughter over a small mistake, and Daniel felt the sound come easily, naturally, surprising him with its warmth, and the realization struck him hard that joy had returned without warning, not replacing grief but standing beside it, and this scared him more than sadness ever had, because sadness felt familiar and safe while happiness felt risky, something that could be lost again, and as weeks passed their conversations deepened, not into romance but into understanding, sharing stories of their pasts without comparing pain, allowing each memory to exist on its own, and Daniel noticed that Emily never tried to pull him forward, never hinted at what could be next, which made him trust her more, because she respected the space between them. And one evening, after a long walk that ended at a small cafe, rain began to fall suddenly, and they stood close under the awning, watching the street blur with water, and Emily reached out and gently held Daniel's arm, not in urgency but instinct, and in that moment Daniel felt a strong wave of emotion, warmth mixed with fear, comfort mixed with longing, and he did not pull away, because pulling away felt like denying a truth he could no longer avoid, and when the rain slowed, they did not rush apart, but neither did they cross any line, choosing stillness over action, and later that night Daniel lay awake replaying the moment, not with excitement but with reflection, realizing that attraction did not erase loyalty, that his heart was not divided but expanding, and this understanding followed him into the next days, giving him quiet strength. And soon he found himself doing things he had stopped doing after Claire's death, cooking full meals, opening windows to let light in, walking without a destination, and though guilt still appeared, it no longer controlled him, because he understood now that love was not a limited resource. And one evening Daniel invited Emily into his home for the first time to help organize donated books, and the moment she stepped inside, he felt nervous, because this space held so much of Claire, but Emily moved gently, respectfully, never touching personal items, never asking questions, and that sensitivity allowed Daniel to breathe easier, and as they worked, the house felt warmer, not because memories disappeared but because they were no longer alone. And later, when Emily prepared to leave, she paused near the door and said she valued the honesty they shared and that she never wanted to push him beyond what felt right, and Daniel thanked her, realizing how rare it was to find someone who did not demand certainty. And after she left, Daniel sat quietly, reflecting on how far he had come without realizing it. And he understood that the space between memory and hope was not a place of conflict but a bridge. One that required patience and courage to cross, and though he still did not know where the path with Emily would lead, he accepted that feeling alive again did not mean forgetting the past, it meant carrying it forward with care, and that acceptance, calm and steady, allowed Daniel to rest that night with a sense of balance he had not felt since before loss reshaped his life. Time did not slow for Daniel, but he learned to move with it instead of fighting every step, and as days filled with routine and quiet moments shared with Emily, he felt a steady shift inside himself, not sudden or dramatic but real, like a door slowly opening to let light in, and he noticed how he no longer counted hours just to survive them, how mornings felt less heavy, how the weight on his chest loosened enough for full breaths, and this change frightened him at first because it felt like stepping into unknown ground. Yet he allowed it because resisting had only brought pain. And one evening as autumn settled over the town, Daniel and Emily walked along a familiar path lined with falling leaves, the air crisp and clean, and without planning it, Daniel spoke honestly, telling her that loving his wife had shaped him forever, that part of his heart would always belong to Claire, and his voice did not shake because the truth no longer scared him. And Emily listened calmly, then told him she did not want to replace a memory or compete with the past. She only wanted to walk beside him in the present. And those words settled deeply, removing the last heavy stone of guilt he carried, because he finally understood that moving forward did not erase what came before. And in the weeks that followed, their connection grew naturally, not rushed, built on trust and shared understanding, and Daniel allowed himself small joys again, like cooking meals meant to be shared, laughing without catching himself, making plans without fear. And when Emily spent time in his home, the house no longer felt frozen in memory but alive with quiet conversation and warmth, and Daniel found himself speaking to Claire less in sadness and more in gratitude, thanking her silently for the love they shared and for the strength it left behind. And one evening, as winter approached, Daniel and Emily sat together watching the sun set through the window, the sky painted in soft colors, and Daniel felt a deep calm settle over him. A sense of being present rather than trapped between what was lost and what might be, and he realized that love had returned to his life not as a replacement but as a continuation, shaped by loss but not defined by it, and this realization brought peace instead of conflict, because he no longer saw his heart as broken but as expanded by everything it had endured. And when Daniel finally reached for Emily's hand, the gesture was gentle and sure, filled with respect and understanding, and she held it without hesitation. And in that moment Daniel felt alive again, not because pain had vanished, but because he had learned to live with it while still choosing connection. And as seasons changed and life continued, Daniel carried his past with care and stepped forward with quiet courage, knowing that love, once given, never truly leaves, it simply teaches the heart how to keep going.